Okay, so in this video, we're gonna go over brachial plexus. Brachial plexus is the collection of anterior rami of the spinal nerve level from C5 through T1. Okay, so these plexus creates complex pathway of the nerve that combine together and then separate branches off, and in the end it'll innervates the entire upper extremity, both sensory and motor and reflex. There is one exception to that I want to mention initially, is going to be the trapezius. So all the musculature that I covered in the previous video is innervated by brachial plexus, except for trapezius. Trapezius has a cranial nerve innervation. So cranial nerve 11, which is the spinal accessory nerve, innervates the trapezius. So that would be the only exception, and everything else will be innervated by brachial plexus, as we are going to look at it first. Okay. Well, before we get to that, though, I want to show you how each spinal nerve root comes out of the intervertebral foramen, and it creates the brachial plexus. So I put a label for each vertebrae and the level. So here's the C5. Okay, so as we mentioned in the spine chapter, this particular nerve that come above the C5 vertebrae is going to be the C5 spinal nerve root. Okay, so this is the C6, C7, and then underneath the C7, there's going to be spinal nerve C8. And remember, for the cervical region, the spinal nerve root come above the vertebrae, right? The corresponding vertebrae. So this is going to be C4, C3, C2. Okay. So, but since in the thoracic region, the spinal nerve root come out below the corresponding vertebrae, so which allow us to have extra nerve between C7 and T1. So that is going to be C8 spinal nerve root right here, okay? But don't get confused, there's only 7 vertebrae in the cervical. And T1, this is the T1 spinal nerve root, create the brachial plexus. Okay, so if you follow and turn this model here, then you see this nice bundles of nerves that are becoming kind of combined together, and then goes all the way down to innervate everything for upper extremity. Next, I want to show you how to draw a brachial plexus. So I want you guys to take a piece of paper and a pen and draw this nice schematic of vertebral body from C5 through T1 and the spinal nerve root that are coming out of between each vertebrae. So first step of drawing a brachial plexus is to draw 3 Ys. So alphabet Y. So the first Y connects the C5 and C6 nerve root and then goes all the way down. The second Y connects the C8 and T1 spinal nerve root and connect all the way down. The third Y is a little bit smaller and reversed direction. So go ahead and draw extension of C7, and in the end, a small Y is going to be drawn. So that is the first step. And the second step, I want you to draw 2 M that are rotated laterally. Okay, so the first M is going to be in the end. Okay, the second M is going to be about here in the middle. So that's the second step. The third step is going to be crossing the only top portion of the more proximal M. And that's it. Lastly, I want to draw some branches. The first one is draw a tail off of the first M that we draw. And second, there's going to be one right off of the C5, 2 from 5 and 6, and 1 here, 3 here, 3 here. And lastly, there's long thoracic nerve that are coming from 5, 6, 7 and coming down all the way. This completes the drawing of brachial plexus, and if I expect you to practice a couple times to memorize how to draw. Once you finish drawing a brachial plexus, let's divide the brachial plexus into 5 different sections. So the first section right here, this is called the root, okay? And the second section is trunk, division, cord, and terminal branches. And these are, you can memorize it by real trainer drink cold beer. Okay, so that's how I remember. But anyway, the root represent each spinal nerve root, and trunk represent these 3 different branches that are, so the superior branch right here, and this is the combination of C5 and C6. Middle is only C7, and inferior represents C8 and T1. Okay, so this is the trunk, and in the trunk we have a few branches that are coming off, which we'll talk about it later. Okay, and next is the division, and this is when the so brachial plexus branches, it comes out as a superior, middle, and an inferior trunk. They divided into anterior division and a posterior division. So first, this is these 2 that are become together, which is the anterior division, and the one that are coming from C8 and T1, there's going to be another anterior division. Okay, so whatever that nerve that is coming from this anterior division will run in front of humerus and innervates the musculature and the skin on the anterior region. On the other hand, these 3 nerves that becomes together, all of them is the posterior division. Okay, so obviously this is written on a piece of paper, so it's 2-dimensionally, but if you think about it as a 3-dimensionally, this will go into the back and innervates all the musculature on the posterior compartment. Okay, so now you see the how the anterior is popping out and the posterior is going deeper. Okay, and in the cord, of course, this cord is named as the posterior cord, but the anterior cord has 2, so further named it as lateral cord and medial cord. But again, these are in the interior in relation to the posterior cord. And lastly, we have terminal branches. So let's review those branches. Okay, so I want to go from the end. So the musculocutaneous, median, ulna, these are the 3 nerves that are innervating the musculature and the skin on the anterior aspect of your upper arm and a forearm and the hand, right? So musculocutaneous, particularly, it'll come down and poke through coracobrachialis muscle, innervates that muscle, and also biceps brachii and brachialis. Median nerve, on the other hand, it's in the middle and it doesn't really do much on the upper arm, but once it gets to the forearm, they innervate the forearm flexor, the wrist flexors. And also has a small innervation to the thenar muscle, which is the musculature in your hand, which creates the movement of your thumb. Okay, so the thumb, okay. Okay, so the ulnar nerve is going to be innervating a few muscle in your forearm. It's located on the ulnar side, which I'm not going to go through right now. We're going to talk about it later in the forearm or the elbow chapter. And majority of the hand. Okay, so most of the hand intrinsic muscle is innervated by ulnar nerve. So here's the anterior division. Okay. In a posterior cord, we have axillary nerve. Axillary nerve goes to the back and innervates teres minor and also the deltoid. Okay, And radial nerve innervates lots of muscle, but primary it innervates the triceps brachii in the upper arm, comes down and innervates the forearm extensors. It's in the posterior compartment. So these 5 nerves are terminal branches of brachial plexus, but we want to rewind and go back and see the small branches right off of the trunks and the cord section of the brachial plexus. So first of all, this little nub that are right off of the C5, this is called the dorsal scapula. Dorsal scapular nerve innervates the levator scapula and rhomboid minor and major, and those 3 musculature together will do scapula elevation. And the next one right here is the suprascapular nerve. And we saw in the bony landmark section of the previous video that there's a suprascapular notch, and that's where the suprascapular nerve comes around and then innervates the supraspinatus, wraps around the spine of the scapula, and innervates the infraspinatus. Okay, so that's the suprascapula that are off of C5 and C6. And right here, there's the nerve to subclavius. Subclavius muscle is, we haven't really saw it yet, but it stabilizes the clavicle and located directly underneath the clavicle. It's a tiny muscle, but it's important to provide a stability of clavicle during the upper extremity movement. And this long nerve, this is called a long thoracic nerve, originating from C5, C6, C7, innervates the serratus anterior. Okay, so the serratus anterior's function is not only to create scapular protrusion, but also protraction. I'm sorry, but also it holds the scapula against the rib. Okay, so it is running fairly anteriorly on the lateral surface, the mid-axillary line, and during the removal of breast tissue for the patients with the breast cancer, oftentimes this nerve is in danger of getting, cut. So surgeons pay particular attention to that location of the specific nerve so that they don't injure long thoracic nerve. If they did injure the long thoracic nerve, the serratus anterior is no longer working properly. So what happened is the condition called winging of the scapula. Winging of the scapula is when the medial border of the scapula pop up. Okay, so it resemble the look of wing. So that's why we call it as a winged scapula. Okay, due to the lost function of long thoracic nerve. Okay, so that is that. And then moving on to, there's no branches off of the anterior and a posterior division. But once we get to the cord, we have 7 branches. So off of the lateral cord, we have lateral pectoral nerve. Lateral pectoral nerve innervates the pec major. And off of the medial cord, we also have medial pectoral nerve. So these 2 nerves, you should memorize it together, and they both innervates the pec major. Okay. Medial pectoral nerve also innervates pec minor. So what you're going to see is you're going to see this particular nerve poking through the pec minor muscle and it innervates the pec major. Okay. And these little 2 branches off of the medial cord is the cutaneous nerve, medial cutaneous nerve of the arm and the forearm. The one closer to the medial pectoral nerve is going to the arm, and then the one further from the medial pectoral nerve is going to the forearm. So these are cutaneous nerve, meaning that they don't innervate the muscle, but they provide sensory innervation to your skin, particularly on the medial aspect of your arm and the forearm. Okay, so last 3 right here off of the posterior cord is the upper subscapula nerve. And then the furthest right is lower subscapular nerve. And these two both innervates the subscapularis muscle, but at the same time, the lower subscapularis also innervates the teres major. Okay. The last one in the middle, this is thoracodorsal nerve innervating the latissimus dorsi. So again, all the musculature that have function to the scapula and the shoulder and upper arm, everything in the upper extremity is going to be innervated by brachial plexus. And a primary function of the reason why we create this complex brachial plexus is because when the injury happens to one single nerve root level, the extent of loss of function is going to be minimized because of this brachial plexus. For example, if you have injury to the C5, let's say right here, okay, most of the nerve, for example, like suprascapular nerve that are innervating the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus, still get innervation from C6, okay, because C6 is okay, right? So even though you lose C5, you still have a C6 that are covering for C5, okay? So this whole thing is to protect our musculature and sensory innervation when the injury happens to one specific nerve root. Okay, you might lose dorsoscapular nerve, but dorsoscapular nerve, I believe it has some innervation from a little bit higher than brachial plexus, like C4. So that way we don't completely, the muscle is going to be weaker, but we don't really lose the function completely. Now let's go back to the model and then appreciate based on what you just drew on a 2D paper. Okay, so here we have C5, C6 making a superior trunk, C7 is the middle trunk, 8 and T1 is the inferior trunk. Now notice that you coming out, these three different trunks that are coming out laterally, and then next step it would be to divide the anterior and a posterior division. Okay, so if I turn this model slightly, then you can see right here, this is the anterior division. Okay, and then this is the posterior division. And I know it's kind of bunched up, so it might be hard to see, but this is the first M that we draw, right? And then you can kind of appreciate how the anterior division is coming anteriorly, and then the posterior division is going posteriorly. And then off of the lateral cord that we saw, this particular nerve would be lateral pectoral nerve right here. Okay. And then this is the medial pectoral nerve. So now you can appreciate how lateral and the medial pectoral nerve, they both, it's each originating from a different cord, lateral cord and a medial cord, but it'll come medially and it innervates the pectoris major. And particularly for the medial pectoral nerve, a minor as well. Okay. And I'm not going to go into all of the detail, but I want to show you the second M that we draw. Here's the median nerve, okay? And then this is the musculocutaneous nerve. And then this is the ulnar nerve. So I know it's not completely M right here, but if you turn it just a bit, it kind of resembles the M that we draw. And again, those are the anterior portion of the brachial plexus terminal branches. And posteriorly, we have, radial nerve, there we go, that runs down all the way to the, goes down posteriorly and then innervates triceps brachii, okay? And then also the axillary nerve, that's one of the terminal branch, and then of course it'll wrap around and innervates the teres minor and the deltoid. Okay, so it might look overwhelming, but you might have to go back and forth between the drawing and the remembering the musculature, and then also go back to the 3D images of the muscles with it, with the nerve, and then appreciate how the brachial plexus runs. This concludes the lecture about brachial plexus, and please review and make sure you know how to draw brachial plexus.